Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode here on The Learning Droid. In this case we've got the burning for the Bowdha sign, or Bowdha sign. As you can see, I'm going to start using the walnut hollow versatile, and we're using sort of medium dark orange temperature. As you can see, I've started with the spear point bit, and this is one of the reasons I like the walnut hollow set for the versatile, in that it doesn't have a rounded point bit, instead it has a flow point. And at the moment I'm using the spear point, but I'm using the tip of the spear point, which in my opinion gives you the essentially exactly the same thing as a rounded point, which means you don't really need the rounded point. And it's actually slightly more convenient because of the curve on the spear point. It actually makes it slightly more comfortable to use for long periods. Gives quite a nice fine rounded burn. Just move smooth and careful. Remember, this is speeded up significantly. This is about, I think it's about 7 or 8 times speed, possibly a bit more. As you can see, just nice and gentle, following in smooth lines. The tip of the spear point is very good for this because it gives you good visibility because of the angle you're holding the machine at, and it's nice rounded point which gives you a nice bit of flow over the top of the grain. It doesn't cut deep into the grain at all. This piece was done for a colleague of mine at work as a gift for a family member, so I quite enjoyed doing it. It's quite a fun bit. It's done on basswood, also known as lindel wood, which is great for burning because it has a nice, very fine grain, and it can be worked down very, very smooth with a little bit of sanding. I buy my planks from a modelling company because modelling planks are quite good. They come pre-sanded, pre-finished, and often only require a little bit of work before you move on to actually using them. And for the most part, keeping exactly the same temperature. The variable temperature side of it is very, very useful, especially when doing things like patterning. As I said in the patterning video, setting the temperature to the right temperature means that you're not worried about burning your pattern, you're not worried about scarring the wood underneath, and it also means that you can set the right temperature for the wood you're burning, which means that you get the right depth of line and the right shading that you want later on. The confidence and the sort of the pace come with time. Sometimes you make mistakes. I'm very bad. I have very shaky hands, so I'm not particularly good at this sort of thing. But with a bit of practice, you get into the flow and start moving nice and smooth, getting the sort of smooth line you want, and getting the degree of accuracy you want in your movements. Now, the spear point tip, using the edge of it to do this, means that you end up with quite a thick line, so I leave some of the more detailed stuff behind because I don't want to have too thick a line on some of the over detailed bits. Hopefully the angle and the speed is right, guys. Any comments about angle, camera angle, and how things are being filmed, more than welcome to leave a comment below. So as you can see, it's a nice, easy design. We've got a few popular cartoon characters, Piglet, Roo, Winnie the Pooh, as it's going to be a door sign for a young child. And it's a nice, simple design, nice, simple, bold lines. I'm not hugely good at shading yet, so I haven't done too much shading. Later on I do a little bit of shading, but it was also because after a discussion with my colleague we decided that it was going to be coloured. So I didn't want to put too much shading into it because shading and colouring together can be a little bit awkward, and sometimes the shading can ruin the colour, and vice versa. Sometimes putting too much colour on can ruin the shading and ruin the appearance of it, because the shading doesn't quite mesh with the colour properly, because of course it's a burnt shade, it's not a different coloured ink or a different coloured pencil or a deeper, darker colouring. It's putting colouring ink or colouring stain over the top. I switch over to the fine point, which I'm going to use for the slightly more delicate lines. start with the bird, nice and easy. Little movements. Always, with this one, because it's got quite a sharp rather than a rounded tip, always drawing the point towards you, so towards the base of the point, rather than pushing forwards, because if you push forwards it's just going to dig into the wood and cause nasty scarring and unpleasant burning. So you always draw the point down towards you, never push it away, and just a nice light touch. Don't press down into it, let the point do the work for you, and make sure you've got the temperature adjusted right. If you're not getting the depth of burn you want, just tweak up the temperature. Don't be tempted to push hard against the piece of wood or to press into the piece of wood, because you'll just find yourself getting heat scarring and overburn and all sorts of nasty things. One of the advantages with basswood is because it has a very fine grain, it's not going to be having issues with the grain catching the piece, catching the pyrography tip as it moves. As you can see, I just added a little strawberry because I thought there was a little bit of an empty patch there that needed a strawberry, and a little bee coming out of the beehive as well. Over on this side of the design we've got a green man, which is to do with the person who's this is a gift for, to do with the child's family, to do with the child's parents. So I was asked to include a green man, and it's like, yep, sure. It's a slightly more detailed bit, slightly less cartoony, which is why I'm using the finer lines of the detail, or the finer lines of the narrow point to do it, rather than using the tip of the spear point, which produces a lot thicker lines and doesn't give as much detail. As you can see, spin the wood so that you get the right angle for the lines you're trying to do. Don't try and rotate your hand around the wood. If you just spin the pattern that you're using, spin the piece of wood you're using so that you can work on it from the right angle, it makes it far, far easier, rather than trying to turn the point, because you have far less mobility in your wrist than you do in the piece of wood, which can just spin 360 very easily. A couple of slightly curved dashed lines to give a little bit of shape to this. Again, it's just a case of filling in, finding the space that needs filling in, finding the space that needs to be put together to make the piece finished, to make it look complete. I already had in mind how the colouring was going to go, so I already knew roughly which bits were going to be coloured, and then I switched to the universal point, because I find for doing tree bark and doing tree lines, universal point's very good. Use the heel of the universal point rather than the tip, and stroke up. This is one of the few times when I push away from the machine, because I'm using the very heel of the bit. Although it's hard to see, the tip of the universal point isn't actually touching the wood at this point. I'm just I'm just skating the heel of the universal point through the wood. And this unfortunately is one of the bits which I just completely mess up. I was trying to do a hollow in the tree, and originally I was going to go for a designed outer edge on the hollow and then a clear inside, but I just messed it up so completely I had to resort to what I refer to as the black penny, which is just a blackened circle to show the hollow. Now I use the rounded side of the very tip of the universal point just to shade in. I turn the temperature down slightly for this, and I also use a much faster movement just to shade in where the leaves are going to be, and then again use the edge of the universal, or the sort of main part of the universal point, to do the straight lines, and then use the edge of the universal point to fill in, to shade in. And as you can see, when I'm shading, it's very small circular movements with this, just to get the slight colorant on the letters. I'm not hugely impressed with my own lettering work at the moment. I still need to do a lot more work on my lettering, but I quite like using the edge, using the blade of the universal point to get the edges of the letter, and then these small circles with the edge of the tip to get the colouring on the inside, to get the shading on the inside of the letter. script was a sort of quite general posh script. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's just a general font. And it turns out reasonably well. That was me using a brass brush to clean some of the carbon from the tip. What a lot of people make the mistake of doing is they don't clean the carbon. Another thing is I've heard a lot of people say that they get the brass tips breaking in solid point machines. You have to remember that brass will expand and contract, as will the machine, as it gets cold and hot. It's far better to put the brass tip into a cold machine and then take it out when it's still warm using a pair of pliers. If you leave it to cool, then there's the risk that it will contract as it's cooling, and the screw thread on the tip of the base of the brass tip will sort of lock into the screw thread on the base of the machine, which means that it won't come out again. So I always take the brass tips out of the machine while they're still warm, and I've personally found that to be the best way of stopping them from snapping, taking them out carefully with a pair of flat nose pliers or needle nose pliers. Miniature pliers, I should say, modeller's pliers. And there you go, guys. A few little bits of touching up, and the final image looks something like that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time.